Welcome again to another reflection of Word Crumbs. Today I'd like to introduce the readings of the 21st week of Ordinary Time. And like to just use the passage of today as well, to bring us into the spirit of this week's readings. As if we have followed the readings from Saturday, we would notice that Jesus, or the Gospel of Matthew, this week is introducing to us a certain group of people that Jesus encountered in all the Gospels, and these were the Pharisees. And the main topic when we come to reflect on the Pharisees is not just to identify a group of people who are special, but to try to identify a certain distraction or a certain challenge that we face as Christians as well, as we grow in our faith. And as you might guess already, the challenge or the tendency or danger, if you like, is hypocrisy. So the Pharisees were known for the hypocrisy, and Jesus challenges their hypocrisy. And we as Christians need to be aware of that tendency for us also towards hypocrisy, and to learn how to overcome it through Jesus and through all the saints who have come before us. Now, if you follow the liturgy of the church this week, you'll notice that it's not continuous, as in the passages are scattered throughout the last few chapters of the Gospel of Matthew. So I just like to use one line from this week, today's liturgy, and you can check it out the rest for yourself, in the internet. It's Matthew 23, 23 to 26. Okay, today's passage, Matthew 23, 23 to 26. And the line I focus on this today is when Jesus tells the Pharisees, clean the inside of the cup first, so that the outside may become clean. So in other words, if you simplify the whole thing, we can say that the root of hypocrisy in our religious practice, in our being Christians, is normally when we focus too much on what we see, what we externally do, and we forget to clean the inside, to focus on our interior lives and our interior journey. So many times frustration or even judgment or even anger can arise from our spiritual practice if we are not careful with what is start and to pay attention to what is inside. So today I just like to borrow the words of a saint. Actually, if you read the office of the readings, it's from the office of today, and it's a saint called John Chrysostom, or John the Golden Mouth. He used to be a preacher in Jerusalem and was very well known for his very incisive and very spiritual sermons. And today he talks about the interior life and how we can learn to continually focus on our interior life in our religious practice, so that we do not become superficial or so-called hypocritical, in our religious practice. And he calls it the 5 paths or the 5 ways of reconciliation. So a heart and interior life that constantly tries to reconcile with God will avoid the danger of hypocrisy, and will bring us to practice deeply and meaningfully our religious practices, going to Mass, confessions, devotions, etc. It will give meaning and purpose to it if interiorly we are clear that our main motive is to constantly reconcile with God. And so these 5 paths, what are they? Basically, so that we can deepen on them. And it's very beautiful. If we really practice all of them, all 5, we'll find that actually a Christian life can be a real commitment in itself, in this reconciliation. So the first path he talks about is to condemn our own sins. So I think that's clear enough. To learn how to examine our consciences constantly or regularly, and to identify what are our own faults, and to condemn those sins, to recognize that they are sins, to claim it for ourselves, that that's my sin, and to say, to ask God for mercy, for forgiveness, by admitting them before Him, and trying to grow out of them, of course. So that's the first, condemning our own sins. Secondly, it is to try not to remember the sins of our enemies. So one thing is to condemn our own sins, and the second is to try to forget the sins of others. And that brings us to an interior life that is deeper. Because when we start to condemn the sins of others, then again it leads us to hypocrisy, because then we feel better, we feel superior to others. If you remember the Pharisee and the tax collector in Luke chapter 18, it was precisely the fault of that Pharisee, condemning the others and forgetting my own sins. So these first two are very basic: condemning my own sins and learning to forget the sins of others. Thirdly, the next three are actually our Lenten practices. The third one is fervent prayer. So apart from condemning sins, learning to devote our time to prayer, to a life of prayer, not just praying in the morning, praying in the night, but making our life an offering of prayer to God. That also brings us to a deeper purpose for all our devotions. When we want to talk to God, to make our life a conversation to God and a daily offering to Him. The fourth path of reconciliation with God would be almsgiving, so charity towards others, dedicating some time in our day or our whole day to seeing what is best for others and learning to dedicate our efforts, our resources, even our time towards helping others in whatever way, especially those most in need. So that's the fourth path, almsgiving. And the last is humility. Humility that sometimes we call fasting, but not only fasting from our physical needs, but fasting from our pride, from our anger, and learning to humble ourselves in front of God whenever the situations around us are difficult. Sometimes the tendency is anger, sometimes the tendency is to frustration, or basically disappointment. And here humility invites us to go beyond these feelings, these bad situations, and to offer it to God and say, Lord, teach me how to cooperate in this bad situation so that I can also grow in reconciliation with you. So once again, these 5 paths of reconciliation according to John Chrysostom: condemning our own sins, trying not to remember the sins of others, fervent prayer throughout the day, almsgiving as a dedication also during the day, and humility when we encounter difficult situations, not to allow anger to overcome us, but to try to submit ourselves and ask God how we can cooperate in the midst of a bad situation. So these 5 practices, once again, will help us to overcome the tendency towards hypocrisy, as the Pharisees do, to learn to grow in the interior life and not allowing our religious practices to become superficial or maybe even meaningless, or leading us to condemn others. So let's try to reflect on these 5 areas and try to see how we can learn to grow in all this. And I'm very sure, based on the experience of the saints, that if we can practice them, we will really grow, not just avoid hypocrisy, but really grow in this interior life and transmit the real meaning and the joy even of our own religious or Christian practices in life.